World leaders and their climate cheerleaders in Academe and Big Business have a new mantra: net zero emissions. What does it mean? How can it be achieved? And what will it do for us? Are they really saving the planet, or more likely leading to a dystopian future where most of us will be packing boxes for Amazon in massive retrofitted warehouses and walking home in the dark? Is this a clever plan, or simply part of a modern day Communist Manifesto that will enrich the ruling class beyond their wildest dreams? British PM Boris Johnson says the UK will achieve net zero by reducing emissions through shifting from gas to electricity to heat our homes, and by better insulating the buildings in which we live and work. We will end the sale of petrol and diesel cars and vans and accelerate the transition to clean, zero tailpipe emission vehicles. John O'Sullivan is CEO of Principia Scientific International. John, many thanks for your time.
You're welcome, Mike.
Look, politicians are all jumping on the net zero emissions bandwagon. At the recent Leaders Climate Summit, which Joe's forgotten about already, several industrial nations such as Japan and Canada pledged to reach net zero emissions by 2050. Can this goal even be explained in scientific terms?
Well, we're back at Groundhog Day here, Mike. You know, the pandemic has died a death now. It seems to be going down the pan. So they're going to try and breathe life back into the climate scare story. And you've got the same old characters coming out of the woodwork again, haven't we? We've got the usual crowd. John Kerry, I see, is the new climate czar for Joe Biden. And he did a very interesting podcast, broadcast on YouTube recently, and got the whole of 23 people watched it, I think. So public enthusiasm for this is not not hitting the high level. So you know, I think they're clutching at straws with this one, Mike.
Instead of net zero emissions, perhaps the real focus should be net zero politicians, net zero academe, and net zero bureaucrats, because the ruling class really are acting like stupid nits, aren't they?
I think they lost the plot, Mike, because they don't know how to prevent the economic collapse that's coming, due any time now. I mean, we all know that we've been living on borrowed time. The financial situation across the whole planet is dire. The pandemic has put the whole world economy in lockdown, and people are racking up debts. So that the rich elite that run us, they want to make sure they keep their coffers topped up. So they're going to find a way for the rest of us to pay, and the way they're going to do it is another scam. And the thing is, they run out of ideas. They tried global warming from the 1980s onwards, and that died a death. As we all know, that interest in the Paris Climate Accord was absolutely negligible. No country would do anything other than pay lip service to it, and there's no real commitment from any large bodies of nation, least of all the ones that pollute the most. You talk about China. China does nothing. India does nothing. It seems that always the Western economies are the ones having to take the brunt. Yourself in Australia, I mean, your so-called carbon footprint is probably less than 1% with your economy the way it is. And it's same here in the UK. We're a service economy now. We don't really produce anything anymore. Our carbon footprint's pretty much negligible. So all these politicians spouting about net zero, it's kind of be net zero by default. We'll all be unemployed and on UBI, universal basic income, at this rate.
Can you tell me, because I'm a Monty Python fan, I mean, I've been watching Boris, and I'm just wondering whether it's a prelude to a new series, a remake of Monty Python. What the hell is wrong with Boris Johnson? I mean, you be a doctor. You be the doctor of Boris Johnson's nonger. And tell us what's wrong with him.
It's the hairstyle. I mean, it starts from there and you work your way down, don't you, really?
Johnny Rotten. Actually, Johnny Rotten hairstyle.
Yeah. Who gives him couture advice? Who gives the guy tips on styling? I don't know. It's a bit scary. You can normally weigh somebody up by their appearance. Well, that's what I tend to do. We tend to judge somebody within 2 or 3 seconds of meeting them. If you meet Boris at a conference, say, and you think, good God, is this the leader of a country? But as you and I know, Mike, these politicians, they're really just the front men. They're puppets. They don't make the decisions. They're only there to put a public front on things. The real decision makers are the billionaire class, who we never see. So again, he's a fool. We know Boris Johnson's a fool, but probably like Barack Obama is good at reading a script, and that's all they have to do.
Tim Flannery, who used to be one of Australia's chief climate change advocates, said, "To reach net zero, it's vital that we replace all fossil fuels use, meet all of our energy needs with renewables, and take concrete action to restore damaged landscapes, promote resilience of those living on the land, and repair past harm to the atmosphere. Doing this will reduce the new emissions of greenhouse gas to as close as zero as possible and remove the greenhouse gases we put there in the past." Now, what's the sense of removing the greenhouse gas we've put there in the past? And more importantly, John, is this scientifically even possible, or maybe just another script for Monty Python?
I mean, that whole paragraph of nonsense is, trying to pick it apart from a scientific perspective. You're struggling because on every level it's wrong. Greenhouse gases, first of all, that's a theory that's been disproven. We can talk about more CO2 in the atmosphere. Well, it's 400 parts per million, over 400 parts per million. Global warming? What global warming? There's been no warming since 1998. Even NASA's got 15 satellites up monitoring the Earth temperature, and they can see no warming since 2005. In fact, the past 12 months is cooling. Even worse, this month in April, believe it or not, in Germany and the UK, we've had the coldest April for 100 years. That's global warming, Mike. Greenhouse gases, 400 parts per million, and it's getting colder, not warmer.
Well, they say we're actually heading into another ice age. NASA even, I recall reading a while back, they said that the sun was losing, it has moments of not being as strong as it normally is. And so, just even a couple of hundred years ago, there was a mini ice age, and many hundreds of thousands of people died, and nothing grew on the land because it was too cold. So I suppose we, in a way, should welcome warmth and fear cold.
Well, this is a tragedy, Mike, because we should be preparing for an ice age, not a global warming period. If you look at the great authorities in the world who are not selling out to the billionaires, for example, even the Chinese say we're looking at perhaps 2 years of cooling. If you look at the Russian Pulkova Observatory, they're saying now maybe 200 years of cooling. The Russian Academy of Sciences, they say there's nothing unusual about modern temperatures. So this hyperbole about global warming, when reality is global cooling's the danger, because if it gets colder, Mike, we can't grow anything.
No.
And we need to grow. I mean, right now, India has just had a record wheat harvest. Despite the lockdown, despite the so-called scares about the pandemic over there and the virus, and the greening of the planet is an amazing thing. NASA, of all people, I mean, they measure everything from satellites. They'll tell you that with higher levels of CO2, the planet's been greening. The Sahara Desert, for example, you may not know this, Mike, but you've got thousands of square miles of extra greening going on there. And the ironic thing here is that CO2, Mike, is plant food. And people don't seem to realise that. They think of carbon. They're told to think about carbon. Well, it's not carbon, it's carbon dioxide. We don't say, when we refer to water, we don't say hydrogen. Point is, Mike, that
I do.
These there's three atoms in a carbon dioxide. For every one molecule of carbon, you've got two of oxygen. Like with water, for every molecule of hydrogen, you've got two molecules of oxygen. So they're playing fast and loose with the science here, Mike, and it's fooling people. You tell think carbon to somebody, and they'll think of soot, which is fair enough. Soot is a form of carbon, but so is a diamond. So is graphite, and it's just so woolly thinking that they can just toss out a word like carbon, cut your carbon emissions, and and anybody without a scientific background, they're easily fooled by this kind of narrative. So, what we're doing, Mike, and what you're probably doing is trying to wake people up to the propaganda these politicians are throwing out at us to cover their own incompetence.
And speaking of Ice Age, I see that Boris Johnson got in a spot of bother, bit of trouble for decorating his igloo, aka flat. Yeah. So that's another thing Boris has got to worry about besides the hairstyle. Very scary future for Boris. Now, leaders like Boris Johnson, who is implementing policies such as congestion taxes, outlawing diesel and petrol using cars, expecting people to be walking everywhere in 2035. What other nonsense is Boris, the hairman, promising in the name of climate change?
Well, the biggest one, I think the biggest one is the pushing for electric vehicles. You know, as you said, they're going to ban the use of diesel and petrol-driven vehicles, and we're going to all go to electric vehicles. And we've got Elon Musk, of all people, coming out on the bandwagon, obviously with Tesla, his baby there, and he's offered a prize of $100 million to anybody who can come up with a new technology for carbon capture. So they're chucking out these prizes, but nobody's winning them because there's no way to win them, Mike, because it's nonsense. You know, electric vehicles, for example. Let's talk about electric vehicles and how green they are. They're not green at all. You take one typical electric car, to produce that car battery, that's equivalent to 8 years of driving on petrol. But people don't see it that way. They think, well, there's nothing coming out the tailpipe. It's clean, it's green, it's going to get an electric car. But no, that is toxic in the building and creation of that vehicle. The lithium ion, for example, in the batteries, that's mined somewhere out in Mongolia. The Chinese have that sewn up, and they're using child labour to produce it. And what they're doing then is they're transporting it thousands of miles. Again, more CO2 emissions coming through the transportation there. And you're looking at the construction of the vehicles, and as you know yourself, these vehicles, you charge them up overnight and they'll run for about 30 miles and you've got to charge them again. So they're not practical either. And
more so in Australia. I mean, there's great distances. So I think with every Tesla, you probably get a tent and a outdoor barbecue and a little disposable potty, and then you could probably plug it into someone's PowerPoint on their farm, and you'll get there eventually, but not quickly. And the thing about just talking about Elon Musk again, I mean, when he made this announcement for his $100 million prize, he said, right, we've only got one planet, he said, and I think even though 0.1% chance of disaster, why should we run that risk? Let's do something. It's crazy. And only last week, Mike, 2 people were killed in a car crash, in a Tesla car crash, because nobody was driving. Where's the risk in that, Elon? What are you talking about, guy? It's crazy. But it'd be great, though, to sit in the back seat. You and I could have a cocktail, just watch ourselves die. It doesn't really work for me. But Elon is pushing Mars, so I suppose that's still a way off. In fact, it's 9 months off from here to there. But I suppose Elon is still looking at living on other planets, which I think is, personally, I think it's very exciting. The Chinese, as we talked about prior, they're probing Uranus, but in a different way. So I mean, the world is. Get that one out every time, Mike. I like it, and that's what I do. My friend of mine says, laugh at the first time he tells a joke because he'll keep telling it. Now, what I've done is I've progressed. You may laugh, but I'll tell it again because I thought it was really funny. John, how many nations are aiming for net zero emissions by significantly increasing their use of nuclear energy? Or are most politicians relying on renewable energy to get them there? Well, I think a lot of people are keeping their cards close to their chest on the nuclear side of it. As you know, Japan really screwed up badly with Fukushima. And we know that the major nuclear powers, they've got the technology already. They're not going to give it up either, are they? So China, Russia, the US, France, UK, and you can add to that Israel as well, maybe 1 or 2 other countries. They've got the technology there, and they will be developing the capability to use nuclear power. But as you know, it takes 20 or 30 years to develop an industry and bring things up on stream. At the moment, we know that China is knocking out about 1 new coal power plant a week or something like that. So, coal is still the main source of energy, and, it's... Like I go back to the point I made about CO2, Mike. But more CO2 means more greening. It's plant food, so why waste a good opportunity? Let's burn some more coal. That's what I think. Get those briquettes out and let it rip, baby.
Well, it's better than burning wood, Mike. I
It
mean,
is.
or go back to the Greens. I mean, in the UK, we're importing wood pellets to burn. And if you know anything about when you're burning wood, that's even more toxic than burning coal. So the green way of doing things seems to be causing more problems than solutions.
What's wrong with hydrogen, though? I mean, Australia has jumped on the bandwagon of the hydrogen bandwagon. How can this be a clean energy source?
It's not. It's well, and if you talk about green hydrogen, yeah, the end product is clean because what you're doing, you're effectively taking lots of water, and you're again taking the hydrogen molecule out and leaving oxygen. Very clean in principle, but look at the cost. I mean, I'll tell you, it takes to get 1 kilogram of green hydrogen, you create 70 pounds of CO2, Mike. 70 pounds of CO2. So again, it's not feasible. And again, if you talk about your transport, I mean, we just said about Elon Musk electric cars being dangerous, but you imagine your hydrogen-powered car. Remember the Hindenburg? That didn't go down too well, did it?
Well, it went down.
Hydrogen's a very, very volatile gas, Mike, and you don't even see it burn. I would not fancy a hydrogen-driven car, a hydrogen-powered car at all.
You have a good point there. I'm just going to write this down to make sure that I don't hop into any balloons with hydrogen. Even if numerous industrial economies reach net zero in 2050, what impact will this have on limiting global warming to 1.5 degrees? And tell us about, I should have some music here, but I won't because of licensing, so we'll just hum. Tell us about this magical goal.
1.5 degrees, 6 foot distance with your masks. The pandemic narrative, the global warming narrative, they've got to give the public something to get their teeth into that sounds sciencey, sounds as if it's credible. 1.5 degrees, what does that mean, Mike? I mean, we've got 1.5 degrees is probably natural variability. I mean, you've also got thermometer error. We know for a fact that we've got 180 years of temperature records from thermometers, ground thermometers. And in what they're called Stevenson screens, you may have seen them where they have screens 3 feet off the ground. Well, they vary by 2 degrees or more. So the margin of error is quite large. It even accounts for the 1.5. So where they're getting their numbers from, at half a degree, I mean, that's nonsense across the planet. I mean, you ask yourself, Mike, what is the correct temperature of planet Earth? They're almost thinking that the carbon dioxide is a control knob of the planet. It's not. It's just nonsense. And I don't know how they've come up with these numbers, Mike, because it has no basis in science.
I think we should be leaving it to people like Bill Gates. I mean, the idea of covering the planet in chalk dust. I mean, that's really good. It must have really cranked up your juices a bit there. You would have thought this guy is just fantastic.
He gave the game away there, though, Mike. Just think about it for a minute. If he's doing that, then they're admitting that the sun is actually the driver of our climate. And yet, the IPCC has been telling us for 40 years it's not. That humans drive the climate. So, kind of no joined up thinking there at all, is there, Mike?
There's not. Now, just we'll do a bit of a left-hand turn here. Censorship. We hit it again this week. We had someone talking about COVID and YouTube took us off. How because we're talking about the environment here, we're talking about wacky stuff here, we're talking about politicians and bureaucrats. Joe Biden has said that we're in a climate emergency. He's forgotten that, by the way, but anyway, he did say that we're in a climate emergency. Censorship, can you see the censorship such as the COVID hysteria just migrating to climate change? Do you think they'll start shutting down everything?
Yeah, I mean, they're trying if you look at what's been mentioned, we go back to good old Klaus Schwab. These people are drawing the parallels between the lockdowns for the global warming. They saw the global economy, pretty much collapse with the COVID calamity, and they're thinking, well, how good is it to have all these vehicles off the road and all the emissions being reduced and all those noisy people locked up in their homes, keeping out of our way. So, it's such a good idea if you're a psychopathic billionaire to find another scare story to put people out of the way. And it's all part of their big Agenda 21, Mike, to depopulate the planet.
Bill Gates, who once said that we need 300 million less people on the planet, is now advocating that we take vaccines. So Is there method in his madness? And we'll leave that for another discussion. John O'Sullivan, CEO of Principia Scientific International. John, how do we find out more about Principia Scientific International?
Well, the best place to find us, Mike, is on the website. It's principia-scientific.org. And Principia Scientific International, just Google us. Don't use Google if you can afford to use it. Use Tor or DuckDuckGo, any other search engine, but avoid all the mainstream billionaire nonsense on Google.
John O'Sullivan, thank you very much.
Thank you, Mike.
To fill us in more on Joe Biden and his plans for the universe, Blake Christian from Holthouse, Carlin and Van Trite. Blake, great to see you.
Great to see you, Mike.
Big question on who got the biggest audience in Joe's speech. Was it Joe's speech? And the only ones watching were the 200 allowed in, or the Oscars. Now, I would probably think that the Oscars normally would have won, but because they had 200 locked in the rooms with Joe, listening to his speech, that's probably 199 more than the Oscars. So I would think that had a greater viewing than the Oscars, which is good for Joe. Wait. Sorry, Blake, I've got a call in my ear. No, figures just in from Central America. They were all watching and packing suitcases. So obviously Joe Biden bombed in the US and did very well in Central America. But being sensible, what are President Biden's new taxes to pay for additional welfare spending?
Well, he hasn't been really specific on the American Families Act, which is his latest, pork-filled bill, $1.8 trillion on the heels of, three other big ones. And part of it, actually, we do know a little bit. Part of it's going to be from enforcement. And with a focus to the ultra rich, so we're going to, potentially see more audits. But the IRS is way understaffed, so I don't know that that's going to happen. And then we've heard about the capital gain tax increase, and then he would basically his whole mission is to unwind everything that Trump has done. So he would roll back individual tax rates to 39.6%. I shouldn't say rolling back, the timetable to 39.6 where they were back in 2017. And then he would also, the big one and the real disruptive one on a worldwide basis, I think, is capital gain rates for people making more than $1 million would jump up to 43.4% when you combine the Obamacare tax for the wealthy on top of a 39.6% ordinary rate. So it would just decimate the stock market, and who's going to put their money at risk to get after state tax on top of that, keep 50% of your risk capital return. It's just not going to happen.
What's the rationale other than increased revenue to increase capital gains tax by so much?
It's really just to punish the rich. I mean, there's just no doubt about it. If you really wanted to collect money, you would do a national sales tax. For pennies on purchases, you could collect trillions of dollars. But that would be a regressive system. But you could give a tax credit to the poor. So it's really kind of surgically to get back at the wealthy, in my mind. This was one of his campaign promises. It does two things. It fulfills his attack on the rich as part of his campaign, and it also unwinds his nemesis's tax breaks. He despises Trump, and all of his followers despise Trump.
Interesting too, he had a welcoming visit from the FBI this morning, or Department of Justice, to Rudy Giuliani's place, and obviously it was just to say, hello, how are you? I hope you're well, and have a good day. not. But the interesting thing, they had this warrant apparently, according to Tucker on Fox, had this warrant that was an open warrant that could search the whole apartment for anything and everything. And on Rudy's laptop was all the information on Hunter Biden, which they left behind. So that's pretty interesting that they go there searching for information on collusion with the Ukraine government in some way. And then the information that would have been there, which obviously, unless he writes letters, pen to paper, it's all sitting on his laptop. But no, they didn't touch it. Interesting, as I said, interesting from the Biden administration, they have this warmth for Republicans. And it's nice to see that they're stretching out their hand to handcuff you, something like that.
Right. That's just wonderful, using your political clout against your, your enemies.
Just
sounds like Nixon administration.
It sounds like Russia or China. Just on that, what's the feeling amongst the high-end business at the moment towards the Biden administration? I mean, a lot of them would have supported Joe Biden in the recent elections, but do you think they would have expected that the transition from a capitalist to a socialist to a communist society was going to happen so fast?
Yeah, I mean, he had a lot of support from, all the Wall Street CEOs, and they'll certainly get the sting from, his policies. I think I mentioned last week too that, a lot of the projections are that the earnings for public companies will be down about 7 to 8% next year if this went through. The simple fact that the stock market is still pretty strong is an indication that the Wall Street doesn't view Congress as really having an appetite for this. I think we've already seen the corporate tax rate that he threatened at 28%. The Democrats have already said, we would settle for 25. So there's already been a compromise there. I think we're going to see some more of that with a 50-50 split in the Senate. So, even though they do have control, all you need to do is swing Manchin or, another moderate Democrat and they're dead in the water. So we'll see what happens.
AOC must be sitting there rubbing her hands going, all for me, none for you. Now, reading a recent email from Matty, Matty says, here's a novel idea. First, let people get back to work. There are millions of unfilled jobs out there. Once those are filled, do like Trump, that terrible name, do like Trump and grow the economy to provide more jobs. What is better, providing full-time jobs or taking money from others and handing out welfare? Welfare is unneeded given the available jobs. Your thoughts on that? And Maddie?
Yeah. And if you read through this American Families Plan, it's just all these giveaways in there, and it's tax credits, refundable tax credits. It's free child care for it's early education, they're saying, for 3 and 4 year olds. So it's really daycare, okay? And they're sitting, the cost of it, is eclipses the supposed lost revenue from these people not being able to work. When you really peel back the onion, it's just incredible how much they're going to spend to supposedly fix, a problem that has these inflated numbers of what it's costing because, we're not giving daycare and we're not, covering health and, people are malnourished. And, and on the flip side, they're saying, 20% of the young kids are obese. So it can't be both, it's either that they're, if it's a nutrition problem, why are 20% overweight? I mean, on the other side, they're sitting there arguing that, all these kids are starving. So anyway, it's really a strange narrative in the White House version of this. And I apologize, I digressed. Let's get back to your question.
No, but it actually makes sense. I mean, what's happening is that at the moment, Biden administration is really poking its nose in everybody's business more than government should. In fact, a refugee who fled communist Cuba warned during a recent interview that he believes many Americans have already swallowed the poison pill of communism. Maximo Alvarez, who fled the United States from Cuba under Operation Peter Pan in 1961, said on the latest episode of the podcast, The Truth with Elisa Booth, that communism has successfully infiltrated American culture and institutions. Do you feel that too?
It is everywhere, and you talk to most of the younger people, and they're all for everything free. And that's my big question, so again, part of this his next plan, stimulus plan, is to pay for 2 years of community college. And it's hard to get into those classes already. So I'm just scratching my head. They don't have the capacity, and maybe they'll use Zoom to a certain extent, but they don't have the capacity to take on 50-100% more students. And so my big question is, I wouldn't mind subsidizing some tuition if they were for majors like engineering, business, some of the trades. I'm a huge fan of electricians and cabinet maker, all that is important to the overall economy, and some people are better suited for that type of long-term job, and that they're going to get out of school and make a ton of money, much more than some of the people that have liberal arts degrees. But we need to get rid of, I heard Hunter Biden's going to be teaching a college class on fake news.
I know, it's hilarious.
Should that even be a class that we're actually paying somebody to teach, and then now we're going to pay somebody's tuition to attend that class?
Yeah, but
and the other thing, there's nothing in here there should be a focus on using technology and getting the cost of education down. I mean, we all know that inflation in universities and things has just skyrocketed way more than inflation over the last 20, 30 years. Why don't they try and control that? And then you get more bang for your buck out of the education system.
Back to Hunter, I mean, really they should have had him not teaching about fake news, should have been teaching about fake business, because he is a fake business person. Right. Even though he does love the Ukraine, it's a lovely place to visit. What does Sean Hannity call him? No experience hunter. So, but he will do a fabulous job teaching fake news, because he will be a fake teacher. Now, back to tax, our favourite subject. Which investors won't be affected by higher capital gains tax?
Well, it's for people that have more than $1 million. Hasn't been clear whether it's taxable income or adjusted gross income. So it's clearly the top 1%, maybe the top 0.5%. But he's going after the top 2% overall, because he said nobody making less than $400,000 will see a tax increase. We certainly know they will, but basically that leaves the top 2% for those making more than $400,000. But the capital gain hit, that really high rate will apply as it stands now for $1 million or more. I'm sure they'll end up dropping that, and but I think they'll drop the threshold, and I think they'll also drop the rate a bit.
What impacts will the tax rises then have on business formation and investment?
Well, normally, I mean, right now everybody loves equities, stock infusions, and they don't really not that interested in making a a debt investment into a company because they're going to get really slim returns, 2, 3, 4% on debt. So the equity has a lot more sizzle, with an expectation of 8, 12, 16% kind of on a, that's not out of the realm of possibilities. And that's a huge difference. And you're going to just see the equity markets dry up in my mind. I mean, I wouldn't be telling clients to, invest $1 million into some speculative startup company if they're going to end up with, only walking with 50 cents on the dollar of whatever profit they make, and they have a better than even chance, or a lot, probably a 8 to 1 chance of losing that money if it's a real startup.
With inflation increasing but still low, well, sort of low, when will financial markets become concerned about the level of government spending and high US public debt?
It's really, I think there's been a shift over the last few years that says, well, maybe that whole, debt thing isn't as big a deal as we thought, because the federal government can keep printing money, and as long as other major financial centers around the world are also, those countries are also printing an equal percentage of new money, it's it's a level playing field. But I think not just the COVID spending, but this is fundamental, socialistic, kind of, pattern that's going on now. I think it's a race to the bottom. We're going to be outspending these other countries, and the dollar is going to devalue. I'm not an economist, but I predict, I feel like the dollar is going to devalue against other currencies, and we're, I think worldwide we're going to have inflation. I mean, there's just no way that you're not going to have inflation from all this spending. And then the other part of it, as we knew, following on the infrastructure, he wants $15 an hour minimum wage across the country. Doesn't matter even if it's a low cost geographic area. Anybody that's going to do government contracting has to be paying that, and even the daycare workers now, for all of these 3 and 4 year olds, they're going to get paid that, and the people with some educational background are going to get paid as much as kindergarten teachers. So all of this is just increase, inflation. It's coming like a freight train.
We talked about it a few months ago. In fact, that with the inflationary, or with the increase in wages, which will lead to inflation. But what also will happen is that those that are on a particular wage, and there was that wage, just say X amount of dollars compared to the one below them because they have more experience and yada, 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 right, they're going to want more too, because they don't want that gap closing too much. So you're probably going to see this great wage explosion, aren't you?
Right, and the big problem, I mean, you had mentioned it earlier about, getting businesses started again and things. There's not people that are motivated to go back to work because they just extended the unemployment period until September. And so if you can, sit on your couch and play Xbox all day, and why are you going to go to work and make an incremental, $100 or $200 more? So everybody who's trying to reopen right now is, they're at a standstill because they can't get the people to work. And I think this is part of their grand scheme to, keep the economy slowed down and let the government, be this big safety net, and the Democrats will control forever because the public's going to know that if the Republicans are controlling, they're going to be a little more frugal on how some of these funds are doled out to people.
And especially when they make Washington, D.C. and Guam states Of course, they're not going to have a majority forever in Congress. Maybe
No.
they might, in fact. Now, we had, just to wind this up, we had Senator Ron Johnson from Wisconsin on the other day, and which enabled YouTube to shut us down because they don't like Ron Johnson and what he was saying. And we're talking about Joe Biden and his presidency, the first 100 days, and we're comparing it to his climb up the stairs of Air Force One. So would you say that Joe Biden's presidency at the moment is very much like that, stumbling and uphill?
I think it's a great analogy, even though I hate to say anybody at his age fall. It is a good analogy, I think.
Now, out of a rating of 10, we had a very strong, I think 5 or 6 at one stage. It's sort of waning a bit out of 10. Is he still in the positives, or has he slipped below that?
Right now, having read the White House fact sheet on the American Families Plan, and on the heels of his other legislation and all these executive orders, I'd give him a 2.5 right now, and I'm being very generous.
Heading below zero, that's net zero popularity. Blake Christian from Holthouse, Carlin and Van Trite. If somebody wants to talk to you about tax, and they mustn't do that until you've had a rest, how do they do that? How can they book in a conversation with you and to talk to you about taxing things?
Right. Contact me after May 17th, the extended filing deadline, please. But the firm website is hcvt.com, and you can Google Blake Christian CPA, and you'll get my contact information and articles there.
Blake Christian from hcvt.com. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mike. Always fun.
And that's it for Asia Pacific Today. Thanks so much for joining us. I'm Mike Ryan.